What if stealing a loaf of bread, speaking out of turn, or being in debt could legally get you killed? Today, we casually debate laws being too strict or unfair. But history once created a legal system so brutal that mercy itself was considered a weakness. In this video, we're resolving one big question. How did humanity ever believe fear was a better tool than justice? And what happens when law stops protecting people and starts terrorizing them? Throughout history, laws have been designed to create order, protect society, and deliver justice. But not all legal systems were built on fairness. Some were designed to control through terror, where punishment mattered more than truth, and obedience mattered more than life itself. One such system became so infamous that its name still defines extreme cruelty today. These were Draconian Laws rules so harsh that even ancient people found them shocking. This video explores how one legal code reshaped justice, spread fear across society, and became a warning that still echoes in modern legal systems. Imagine a city where justice is not delivered in courtrooms but hunted down in alleyways. A place where anger travels faster than reason, and revenge is often the only law people trust. This was Athens before the rise of Draconian Laws, a society standing on the edge of collapse. To understand why such extreme laws were even considered, we first have to step into the fear, frustration, and chaos that defined everyday life in ancient Athens. Athens was not yet the celebrated cradle of democracy. It was a fractured city-state torn apart by social inequality. Power rested in the hands of a wealthy elite, while ordinary citizens lived under constant pressure. Debts were ruthless. A farmer who failed to repay what he owed could lose his land, his freedom, or even be sold into slavery. There was no safety net, no second chance, and no consistent system of justice to protect the weak. When survival itself felt uncertain, resentment became a permanent feature of daily life. Crimes were not handled by an impartial state. Justice was personal. If someone wronged you, it was your responsibility or your family's to respond. This created endless cycles of vengeance. One killing sparked another. One insult led to bloodshed. Entire families carried grudges for generations, and violence became normalized. The law, as people understood it, was unreliable, inconsistent, and often invisible. In this environment, fear was not an exception, it was routine. Public trust and leadership eroded quickly. The rich manipulated vague customs to protect themselves, while the poor felt abandoned and exposed. There was no written legal code that applied equally to everyone. Decisions were shaped by influence rather than fairness. To the average Athenian, justice felt like a privilege reserved for the powerful. And when people stop believing in justice, they start believing in force. As crime increased, so did panic. Theft, assault, and murder were not just personal tragedies. They became symbols of a system that had lost control. Citizens demanded order at any cost. They didn't ask for kinder laws or more thoughtful punishments. They wanted certainty. They wanted rules so clear and consequences so terrifying that no one would dare cross the line. In moments of desperation, societies often choose control over compassion, and Athens was no different. This growing desperation created the perfect conditions for extreme solutions. People believed that if fear could overpower chaos, then fear was worth embracing. The idea took hold that leniency encouraged crime, while cruelty prevented it. Mercy was no longer seen as a virtue, but as a weakness that criminals exploited. The louder the violence grew, the more silence people demanded in response. It was in this atmosphere that the call for written laws became urgent. Not because Athenians suddenly cared about equality, but because they were exhausted by unpredictability. They wanted a system that didn't bend, didn't hesitate, and didn't leave room for interpretation. A system that promised order, even if it came at the cost of humanity. They were willing to trade fairness for stability, believing that harsh laws would finally bring peace. This is the paradox at the heart of Draconian laws. They were not born from cruelty alone, but from fear of crime, fear of disorder, fear of losing control entirely. When a society feels cornered, it often reaches for the most extreme tools available. Athens was no longer asking how to build a just system. It was asking how to survive the chaos consuming it, and in that moment, the stage was set for a legal code that would shock history and redefine the very meaning of harsh justice. When people hear the word draconian, they imagine cruelty without conscience, punishment without mercy, and laws written in blood. But behind that word stood a real man, Draco. To understand why his laws became the most feared in history, we have to separate myth from reality and step into the world that shaped his thinking. Draco did not emerge as a monster in isolation. He emerged as a response to a society demanding absolute control. Draco was appointed in the late 7th century BCE not as a tyrant but as a lawgiver. His task was simple in theory and impossible in practice. Take the chaos of Athenian customs, traditions, and personal revenge and turn it into a single written legal code. For the first time, laws would be publicly displayed, visible to all citizens. This alone was revolutionary. Until then, justice had lived in memory, rumor, and manipulation. Draco's laws were meant to end uncertainty, even if they replaced it with fear. What made Draco's approach so extreme was his belief that crime could only be controlled through absolute deterrence. According to later writers, when asked why he punished even minor offenses with death, Draco reportedly replied that small crimes deserved death, and for greater crimes, no harsher punishment existed. Whether this quote is perfectly accurate or not, it captures the philosophy behind his code. To Draco, the severity of punishment was not a flaw, it was the solution. In his legal system, intention mattered little. Circumstances mattered even less. The law did not bend for desperation, hunger, or accident. Justice was mechanical. Break the rule, face the consequence. In a society tired of favoritism and manipulation, this rigid consistency initially felt reassuring. Everyone, at least in theory, was equal before the law. The poor and the powerful were finally judged by the same standard, even if that standard was merciless. But this equality came at a terrifying price. By removing interpretation, Draco also removed humanity. Judges were no longer weighing right and wrong, they were enforcing inevitability. There was no room for mercy, no space for rehabilitation, and no acknowledgement of moral complexity. The law became an instrument of fear rather than understanding. Citizens did not obey because they believed in justice, but because they feared the outcome of disobedience. Draco himself remains a shadowy figure. Very little is known about his personal life, beliefs, or emotions. This silence has allowed his laws to speak for him across centuries. Some historians argue that Draco was not unusually cruel for his time, but unusually honest. He wrote down what others enforced quietly. He exposed the brutality already embedded in society and made it impossible to ignore. Others believe he fully embraced fear as a governing strategy, convinced that terror was the only language chaos understood. What is clear is that Draco became inseparable from the system he created. His name outlived his life, transforming into a warning label for excessive punishment. Unlike other lawmakers who were remembered for balance or wisdom, Draco was remembered for severity alone. His identity dissolved into his laws, as if the man himself became a symbol rather than a person. In choosing certainty over compassion, Draco set a precedent that would haunt legal systems for centuries. He proved that laws could control behavior, but he also revealed what happens when control becomes the only goal. Order was achieved, but at the cost of fear becoming a permanent resident in everyday life. The man behind the fear may have believed he was saving Athens, but in doing so, he created a legacy that forced future generations to ask whether justice without mercy is justice at all. Imagine living in a world where the line between a small mistake and a fatal crime does not exist. Under Draconian laws, this was not an exaggeration, it was daily reality. The most shocking feature of Draco's legal code was not just its severity, but its simplicity. Almost every offense, regardless of scale or intent, carried the same punishment: death. In the eyes of the law, stealing a vegetable and committing murder existed on the same moral plane. Petty theft was enough to end a life. Taking food to survive, stealing out of desperation, or making a minor transgression against property could result in execution. There was no concept of proportional justice. The law did not ask why a crime occurred, only whether it occurred. Hunger, poverty, or ignorance offered no protection. The punishment was fixed, absolute, and final. This created a terrifying paradox. When all crimes are punished equally, the distinction between right and wrong begins to blur. If the consequence of stealing bread is the same as killing a man, what incentive exists to restrain oneself once the line is crossed? Draconian justice removed gradation, turning law into an on or off switch rather than a moral compass. Fear was meant to prevent crime, but in some cases it encouraged recklessness. Even accidental killings were treated with brutal rigidity. Although Draco did introduce a rare distinction between intentional and unintentional homicide, the consequences were still severe. Exile, loss of rights, and permanent social exclusion awaited those found guilty of killing without intent. Life after judgment was not a second chance. It was a slow erasure from society. The law ensured that even survival felt like punishment. Debt-related crimes were equally unforgiving. Failing to meet financial obligations could lead to enslavement or death. A citizen's worth was measured by obedience and economic compliance, not by circumstance or potential. The law protected property more fiercely than life, reinforcing the power of the wealthy while terrifying the poor. Justice became an economic weapon, reinforcing social hierarchies while claiming neutrality. There was no safe category of offense. Speaking out of turn, violating customs, or challenging authority could be interpreted as crimes worthy of extreme punishment. Laws were written clearly, but their enforcement was relentless. Once accused, a person entered a system that did not negotiate. Courts were not places of debate, but of confirmation. The outcome was often decided before the trial began. Executions were not hidden away. They were public reminders of consequence. Each death reinforced the message that law was not a guide, it was a threat. Citizens learned obedience not through understanding, but through witnessing fear made flesh. Children grew up knowing that one mistake could erase their future. Adults lived cautiously, measuring every action against the possibility of irreversible punishment. What makes the system especially chilling is how logical it appeared to those who supported it. They believed that the certainty of death would eliminate crime entirely. They believed that terror could engineer morality. In theory, no one would dare break the law if the price was always life itself. In practice, it created a society frozen by anxiety, where compliance replaced conscience. By equating all wrongdoing with death, Draconian laws stripped justice of its nuance. The law no longer reflected human complexity, but denied it altogether. Crime became a binary condition, innocent or dead. This rigidity did not elevate morality. It reduced it to survival. People obeyed not because they believed in the law, but because they feared becoming the next example carved into public memory. In a system governed by draconian laws, fear was not a side effect of justice, it was the strategy. The state did not rely on trust, shared values, or moral education to maintain order. It relied on terror. Fear became the invisible guard standing in every street, every home, and every mind. Citizens did not need constant supervision, because the consequences of disobedience were so extreme that self-policing became instinctive. The brilliance and the horror of this system lay in its psychological control. People learned to regulate themselves long before the law ever reached them. A careless word, a desperate act, a moment of anger could lead to irreversible punishment. Over time, this constant threat reshaped behavior. Citizens became quieter, more cautious, and less expressive. Not because they had become more virtuous, but because survival demanded restraint, fear also erased dissent. Questioning the law, criticizing authority, or challenging tradition became unthinkable risks. Silence became a form of safety. Public life lost its vitality as people avoided attention. Innovation slowed, creativity withered. When fear governs behavior, conformity replaces individuality. The law did not need to chase criminals. It discouraged people from becoming anything that stood out. Social relationships were poisoned by suspicion. Neighbors watched neighbors. Friends measured their words. Even families were not safe spaces. One accusation, whether true or false, could trigger consequences that could not be undone. Trust collapsed under the weight of collective anxiety. In such an environment, community did not strengthen, it fractured. Everyone became both a potential criminal and a potential informant. The public nature of punishment reinforced this fear relentlessly. Executions and severe penalties were not hidden from view. They were designed to be seen, remembered, and feared. Each punishment served as a lesson to the living. The state turned suffering into spectacle, ensuring that obedience was learned visually and emotionally. Law was no longer an abstract concept. It was etched into memory through loss and trauma. This reliance on fear also changed how people understood morality. Right and wrong were no longer internal values but external threats. People did not ask whether an action was ethical. They asked whether it was dangerous. Morality became transactional. If an act did not risk punishment, it felt permissible. If it did, it was avoided regardless of intention or impact. The law shaped behavior, but it hollowed out conscience. Ironically, the very fear meant to eliminate crime created new forms of injustice. False accusations became powerful weapons. Personal grudges could be disguised as legal claims. With consequences so severe, even the suspicion of wrongdoing was devastating. The system offered no protection against misuse because mercy was not part of its design. Fear does not discriminate between the guilty and the innocent, it consumes both. Over time, fear also eroded loyalty to the state. Obedience achieved through terror does not create respect. It creates resentment. Citizens complied outwardly while emotionally withdrawing. The law succeeded in controlling bodies but failed to win hearts. Stability achieved through fear was fragile, dependent on constant reinforcement and collective trauma. Draconian laws demonstrated a dangerous truth. Fear can enforce order, but it cannot create justice. It can silence chaos, but it also silences humanity. A society ruled by terror may appear disciplined, but beneath the surface, it is tense, brittle, and one mistake away from collapse, where obedience survives but trust, empathy, and freedom slowly disappear under the weight of constant intimidation. Behind every harsh punishment recorded under Draconian laws was a human story that never made it into the legal record. Laws speak in crimes and penalties, but societies live in fear, loss, and broken lives. When law becomes absolute and unforgiving, its greatest impact is not on crime statistics, but on the people forced to exist beneath its shadow. The true cost of draconian justice was paid quietly, in homes emptied by executions and in minds shaped by constant terror. Families lived with permanent uncertainty. A single accusation could erase a father, a son, or a sibling from existence. There were no appeals, no reduced sentences, and no meaningful chance for forgiveness. Loved ones were left without closure, without explanation, and without recourse. Grief became routine, normalized as part of civic life. When death becomes a legal outcome for minor offenses, mourning becomes a shared social condition rather than an exception. Children grew up absorbing fear as a lesson rather than learning ethics as a value. They did not ask what was right or wrong. They learned what was safe and unsafe. Curiosity was dangerous. Mistakes were fatal. Education, creativity, and emotional expression were all constrained by the same underlying message: survival depends on obedience. Over time, this reshaped entire generations, producing citizens skilled at avoidance rather than critical thought. The psychological toll was immense. Constant fear creates constant stress, and constant stress erodes empathy. People became emotionally guarded, hesitant to help others, afraid that involvement itself could invite suspicion. Compassion became risky. Assisting someone accused of wrongdoing could implicate you as well. As a result, isolation increased. Individuals learned to endure suffering alone rather than seek collective support. The poor suffered disproportionately. While draconian laws claimed equality, reality exposed imbalance. Poverty made people vulnerable to crime out of necessity, and necessity carried no legal defense. Hunger did not soften punishment. Debt did not excuse failure. Those without resources were far more likely to cross legal lines and far less able to protect themselves once accused. The law treated everyone the same, but its impact was anything but equal. Even those who enforced the laws were not untouched. Judges and officials became instruments of inevitability rather than agents of justice. Repeated exposure to extreme punishment desensitized them. When death is routine, moral reflection fades. The system required its enforcers to suppress doubt and empathy to function effectively. In doing so, it transformed them as much as it transformed the accused. Over time, society lost its sense of shared humanity. When law ignores circumstance, intention, and redemption, people stop seeing each other as complex beings. Citizens became categories, compliant or condemned. This erosion of empathy weakened social bonds and reduced collective responsibility. Fear prevented crime, but it also prevented solidarity. What makes this cost especially tragic is that it was invisible to the law itself. Draconian justice measured success through obedience and order, not well-being or fairness. It did not account for trauma, grief, or moral decay. Yet these unseen consequences shaped society far more deeply than any written statute. The law remained rigid and unyielding, while the people beneath it slowly adapted by becoming smaller, quieter, and more afraid, living not as citizens protected by justice, but as survivors navigating a system that valued control over human life. Draconian laws did not collapse overnight. They did not fall because of a sudden revolution or an immediate rejection by the people. They failed slowly, under the weight of their own rigidity. Over time, Athenians began to realize that fear alone could not sustain a functioning society. Order had been imposed, but justice had not been achieved. Stability existed on the surface, yet underneath, resentment and moral exhaustion were spreading. The first cracks appeared when people recognized that extreme punishment did not eliminate crime, it merely changed its form. Fear discouraged minor offenses in public, but desperation did not disappear. Crimes went unreported. Disputes were hidden. Violence retreated into the shadows rather than vanishing altogether. When punishment is absolute, truth becomes dangerous. People lie to survive. Witnesses stay silent. Justice becomes impossible when honesty carries the risk of death. Athens also discovered that laws without flexibility cannot adapt to human complexity. Life is unpredictable. Accidents happen. Circumstances vary. Draconian laws treated every violation as equal, and in doing so, ignored the moral differences that define real justice. Over time, even supporters of the system struggled to justify executions for minor transgressions. What once felt like strength began to feel like cruelty without purpose. This growing discomfort paved the way for reform. Later lawmakers, most notably Solon, repealed most of Draco's code. Only the laws dealing with homicide remained, and even those were softened. This was not just a legal change, it was a philosophical shift. Athens began to move toward the idea that justice should balance order with mercy, and that laws should serve people, not terrorize them. The failure of draconian laws became a lesson written into the foundation of democratic thought. Yet Draco's legacy did not disappear. His name survived as a warning. To this day, when laws are described as draconian, it signals something deeply wrong, a system that prioritizes punishment over fairness. His legal experiment became a historical mirror, reflecting what happens when authority confuses severity with effectiveness. What makes draconian laws still matter is how often societies return to the same logic in moments of fear. When crime rises or disorder threatens stability, the call for harsher punishment grows louder. History shows this pattern repeating again and again. Leaders promise safety through strength. Citizens accept reduced freedoms in exchange for order. Fear becomes politically useful. Draco's story forces an uncomfortable question. If fear works even temporarily, why does it ultimately fail? The answer lies in human nature. People are not machines responding predictably to threat. They are complex, emotional, and moral beings. A system that ignores this complexity may control behavior, but it cannot cultivate loyalty, trust, or shared responsibility. Without those, society becomes fragile. The lasting lesson of draconian laws is not that laws should be weak, but that they must be human. Justice requires judgment, empathy, and proportionality. When law becomes absolute, it loses its moral authority. Fear can enforce obedience, but it cannot create legitimacy. The moment people obey only to survive, the law has already failed its highest purpose. Draco believed he was saving Athens from chaos. In reality, he revealed the limits of fear as a governing principle. His laws stand as a reminder that the harshest systems often emerge from desperation, and that true stability is not built by threatening life, but by protecting it through fairness, restraint, and an understanding of the human condition. As we step back from the shadow of draconian laws, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. History's harshest legal system was not built by cruelty alone, but by fear disguised as necessity. Athens believed it could crush chaos by making punishment absolute, and for a time, obedience did replace disorder. But what was gained in control was lost in humanity. Justice became mechanical. Mercy vanished. And law, instead of protecting life, became a constant threat to it. Draco's legacy forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality about power and fear. When societies feel unsafe, they often reach for extreme solutions. They accept harsh rules, surrender compassion, and convince themselves that cruelty is strength. Yet the Draconian experiment revealed the cost of that thinking. Fear may silence crime, but it also silences trust, creativity, and moral responsibility. It creates survivors, not citizens. The fall of Draconian laws marked a turning point, not just for Athens, but for the idea of justice itself. Later reforms showed that order and mercy do not have to be enemies, and that laws gain legitimacy not through terror, but through fairness and restraint. The lesson endured because it was paid for in human lives, and that is why Draconian laws still matter today. Every time a society debates harsher punishment, zero tolerance, or justice without flexibility, it echoes the same ancient belief that fear can solve what understanding cannot. History answers that belief clearly. When law forgets the people it governs, it becomes another form of violence. The true purpose of justice is not to terrify society into obedience, but to hold it together with balance, accountability, and humanity. Draconian laws stand as a warning written across centuries, reminding us that the harshest systems may promise order, but only just systems can sustain it.